I'm now delighted to introduce our next speaker, Marcus Herbert, who is the Head of Wellbeing for the British Safety Council. I have the great pleasure of working very closely with Marcus on a number of different projects. And over the next 45 minutes, Marcus is going to share his insights and findings to help us better understand the real business case for workplace wellbeing. Marcus is also going to get us to think about and consider the necessary factors for the design and implementation of a successful wellbeing program. Marcus has over 15 years experience, 2 degrees, and has worked with individuals, elite athletes, leadership, line management, all around enhancing their personal wellbeing and reducing risk of lifestyle diseases. But also Marcus has worked with numerous organizations, from small through to global multinationals, on their approach to strategic organizational wellbeing, developing effective and meaningful strategies. And more recently, Marcus has been involved in developing education programs for leadership, management, and for workforces around the world on the most effective ways to enhance wellbeing at work. Marcus, over to you and welcome.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephen, for the introduction and for having me. And also, just so far from the 2 presentations that we've seen, a lot of what we've seen will actually be touched upon within this presentation. So far, it's all going well on theme. And so the reason why I've decided to present on this particular topic is actually on the back of some work that we've done recently as part of our Keep Thriving campaign. So what I wanted to do within my session is separate it out into 2 key parts. One is actually to give you a bit of insight into what we've recently done with our Keep Thriving campaign in delivering some wellbeing strategy workshops. So I'll give you some insight into who was attending these types of workshops, the number of people that have attended, why they were attending these workshops, what their key pains were within their workplace wellbeing strategy, and then also what some of the outcomes are from those workshops, and then what the next steps are with that piece of work. And then after going through the findings, or some of the findings from our Keep Thriving Wellbeing Strategy workshops, I then want to move into some of the key factors that are required to be able to put together a business case for workplace wellbeing. And part of the reason why I wanted to cover that particular topic is actually just on the findings of the initial analysis that we've done for the Keep Thriving Wellbeing Strategy workshops. And it seems to often be a topic that is asked about, and many organizations that we've worked with in the past have asked, how do we assess the effectiveness of wellbeing? How do we prove that there is a need for wellbeing within our workplace? So what I want to do is just address some of the ways in which organizations can actually put together a business case in order to influence those decision makers within the organization. And so with the Keep Thriving work itself, Keep Thriving is the name of our campaign that is centered around workplace wellbeing. It's something that you are able to sign up to for free and take part as being involved in our Keep Thriving campaign. And we have published a Keep Thriving manifesto, which sets out what our aims are in more detail, as well as a wellbeing positioning paper showing why better wellbeing matters within the workplace. So you can actually go ahead and have a look at that if you're not already signed up to our Keep Thriving campaign. But towards the end of last year, I was asked the question internally about what could we do to support organizations with their wellbeing at the moment. And what the research was telling me was that many organizations that feature within the small to medium-sized enterprises are showing and reporting that they don't at the moment have a documented wellbeing strategy in place. And I also know that from the research, when you have a documented wellbeing strategy in place, you are more likely to be successful with whatever wellbeing programs that you put together. So we decided to put together these 3-hour workshops, which were free to attend, providing that those that were applying passed our assessment criteria. And we started delivering them in November of 2022, and we've just delivered our final one of this phase of the workshops in March. So this is kind of fresh off the press. We haven't released this information externally as yet in terms of what the outcomes were. So this is the first insight. And we will also be evaluating the impact of these workshops in 6 months post each workshop delivery. And we're also going to be delivering a roundtable event specifically for those that attended these workshops in the summer. So what exactly were we trying to achieve with these workshops? Well, the objectives, listed on the screen. Firstly, we really wanted to just help organizations at the moment that are lacking the resources and the direction that is needed in order to create a wellbeing strategy. I will actually talk a bit more about what the outcomes or the learning outcomes were for the workshops shortly. But we also really wanted these sessions to not be a 3-hour delivery of the presentation. We wanted to be a workshop in which other organizations could actually share some of the challenges that they face and also maybe some of the wins that they've achieved in their delivery of wellbeing programs. So shared learning was another objective of these workshops. And then, of course, we wanted to use this as an opportunity to educate the benefits of taking a holistic approach on putting together a wellbeing strategy that is meaningful based on the need of the organization, rather than selecting something that is apparently famous or in social media or just relevant at the time. So you might be wondering, well, actually, who attended, how many attended? Well, in that period from November to March, we had 216 individual applications, and we had to assess every single one of those applications. We had a question series that they had to complete beforehand, and then we had an assessment criteria attached to those questions, just making sure that the people that we actually accepted onto these workshops were in most need of the support that we could provide. Of those 216 applications, 199 were successful. And admittedly, actually, many of the ones that weren't successful were actually just because they were larger than the cohort that we were, actually aiming these workshops at, as opposed to them not being accepted for other reasons. And then of those 199 that were successful in the application process, 123 overall attended the actual workshops that we put on, and we had 20 virtual workshops delivered within that time period. The initial indications of who actually attended these sessions show that the top 3 positions were those of either a director position, either a HR manager or a health and safety manager. But we are actually planning on doing more detailed analysis of the demographics and also the outputs. We've captured a huge amount of information, both qualitative and quantitative in nature. So in the future, we will be producing more of a detailed analysis on who attended. In terms of the workshop content, as I think was quite nicely put in Jonathan's keynote presentation, there are many ways to define well-being. And yeah, a quick Google search, you can find all sorts of different definitions. So we actually spend a fair amount of time on that within the workshop, trying to understand how do other people within those workshops identify with well-being within the workplace. But we also make a key point of relating well-being to health and safety and why managing it is so important. And we also spend a fair amount of time looking at how many organizations are getting it wrong, not through ill intention. Any organization that is investing in the well-being of their workers is more than likely doing it for the absolute right reasons, even if a positive outcome of that results in business improvements. But we were looking at ways in which organizations might be selecting an approach to workplace well-being, but just might be missing out some of the prerequisites. And we're actually going to be covering some of that within this presentation today. Another thing that actually was raised during Jonathan's session was recognizing the different roles and responsibilities in managing wellbeing, and that everybody ultimately has a level of responsibility, whether they realize it or not. Then, of course, the main point of these workshops was actually helping the attendees to understand how to adopt a strategic approach to wellbeing, as opposed to just delivering interventions because they think that they are the thing that their employees want. Something that we're going to be touching on later in this presentation as well is the importance of data and evaluation, and some examples of ways in which you can actually assess or evaluate the impact of wellbeing interventions. And then lastly, and very importantly, the importance of engaging people within the organization and communicating the message in a way that they can receive rather than simply broadcasting it. So we covered those 6 key areas within the space of 3 hours. So I'm sure, as you can imagine, there was quite a lot of detail covered within those sessions. And prior to attending these workshops, we had, as I mentioned before, a series of questions that form part of the assessment criteria. And what I wanted to share with you was some of those findings. The question, what challenges are you facing now when it comes to the wellbeing of your workforce, was of course one of the questions. And this was a free text box. So what I'm showing you now on screen is themes that we picked out from the vast amount of data that we received, as opposed to a drop-down selection box. We really wanted to give freedom for people to report on what the key challenges they're facing at the moment. And as you can see, we've selected there some of the most occurring themes: stress and burnout, mental health, engagement, culture, and COVID still. And so, of course, we wanted to capture that information so we could at least have an understanding as to why this organisation might be looking to attend these workshops, and whether or not we could tailor some of the content based on the specific need. And in addition to understanding what their current challenges are, we also wanted to have a good understanding as to what have they tried before. And I think you'll find this is quite interesting, that the vast majority of attendees of these workshops were saying that they had tried some interventions with some measures. And I think that's quite an interesting point when you start to consider what does it take to produce a business case to secure funding for further investment in wellbeing. And having measures for success is one of the most important things that you can put into a business case document. And yet the majority of organizations are reporting that they've tried some interventions with some measures of success. Then lower down, what have they tried before? 15% of the attendees said that they had tried nothing to date. 15% said that they'd tried interventions but no success measures. So they have things in place, they're providing these benefits and these interventions to their employees, but at the moment they're not tracking the success of these measures. And then 13% said they have no plan or strategy in place, and 8% said they have a strategy but no plan. Another response that was available that 0% of attendees selected was that they have found success in their wellbeing strategy and have been recognised for that externally. So you can see, even just from what people have tried before, there is certainly a need for providing guidance on how to produce a strategy for wellbeing. Then when asked the question, why do they think they're facing these challenges? One of the most popular reasons for wellbeing interventions not being successful, as reported by many outlets, is not enough time by those that are responsible for it. But again, interestingly, that is something that is supposed to feature as part of putting together a business case. So we'll touch on that again a little bit later on. 28% reported low employee engagement. And of course, if you're familiar with the virtuous cycle of engagement and well-being, you'll know that if you have high levels of engagement within an organization, you will have high levels of well-being. And if you have high levels of employee well-being, you'll then also have high levels of employee engagement. 19% reported that changes within the business were a reason why they think they're facing these challenges. And then lower down in the percentages was lack of budget, and it's a new business. So we're in a position of setting up, we're a new starter. And so, of course, they're going to be facing challenges outside of a well-established organization. Then when we asked the question, what would help you overcome these challenges? Interestingly, the majority of attendees outlined that learning how to develop a strategy would be the #1 thing that they think would help them to overcome these challenges, even though not having enough time was also the #1 challenge that they highlighted. Of course, it takes time to put together a wellbeing strategy. Then, of course, making wellbeing integral to the business plan, knowing more about best practice, and an ability to measure and assess wellbeing initiatives were all highlighted as things that they felt could help them overcome the challenges that they were facing. Again, all of these things feature within what's required to generate a business case for investing in wellbeing. So, many of these attendees are articulating things that they think would help them overcome these challenges. And yet what we found was many of them hadn't documented these into a business case in order to get more support from the organization, whether that was resources or time, or of course, funding to be able to put together a wellbeing program that is supported by a wellbeing strategy. And then interestingly, lower down on what they felt would help them to overcome the challenges, they had financial help to try out new ideas and a better understanding of their staff. Now, I think that 3% of the attendees saying that better understanding of their staff would help them overcome these challenges. We actually quite often say when we're helping organizations with their wellbeing strategy, that understanding your staff should be the #1 thing in order to help you understand how to overcome the challenges. when you look at things like the engagement rates, and when you look at things like the reason for having wellbeing programs and strategies in place, more often than not, it is completely centered around the employees. And so having a better understanding of the staff really should be right at the very top of things that would help an organization to overcome the challenges they're facing. And again, this will feature as part of the second part of this presentation of how to create a business case for wellbeing. And then after the workshops were delivered, of course, we had a detailed survey for the attendees to be able to let us know what they thought of the session, what they liked, what they didn't like, what they thought about the length of the session. And of course, we're doing a really detailed analysis of all of that qualitative information that we've captured. But one of the key things that we really wanted to capture as well was whether or not the workshop in isolation, with no further support beyond that, had any influence over their perception of or their understanding of what good wellbeing strategy looks like. And so what we did was, again, after these workshops, ask the question, does your organization currently have a written wellbeing strategy? And the vast majority, 70% of the attendees said no. Interestingly, when you look at the cohort of those that attended, so organizations with less than 500 employees, that percentage of 70% not having a written wellbeing strategy almost exactly aligns with the findings from the CIPD from their work and wellbeing report that was published in April last year, which will probably be due for renewal soon. But yeah, that percentage almost aligns perfectly with findings of other organizations. And then less than 20% said yes, they have a written wellbeing strategy. And then what I've shared here is some of the comments that we had within the other. So other, please specify. Because interestingly, I think that you could argue that in some cases that maybe in fact yes would have been the answer as opposed to other. But also some of the encouraging comments that have come out that whilst they don't think that they have a written wellbeing strategy, the workshop has encouraged them to start to look at writing one as a result of attending the workshop. But more specifically than that, if you look at the question the question responses in the bottom left of the screen, we asked the question, has attending this Keep Thriving workshop enhanced your understanding about what good wellbeing strategy looks like? And you'll see that the vast majority, so 90% of attendees said yes. So of course, we're really pleased that the workshops in isolation, a 3-hour workshop of people attending, has had a positive impact on their understanding of what good wellbeing strategy looks like. And then again, when you look at the other responses, you can see that people have either said that it confirmed their existing beliefs and priorities, or it didn't enhance their understanding, but it focused their understanding. And interestingly, somebody, although we selected other as a response, they started their response with yes in capital letters, so they must really mean that yes. So yeah, obviously we're really pleased that these workshops so far have had a positive impact on the understanding of what good wellbeing strategy looks like for those that have attended. But of course, we're not just leaving it there. We do have some next steps in this process and with these workshops. And at the moment, what we're doing is collating a series of case studies of volunteers that have attended at these workshops, so that we can start to share some experiences within those organizations of where they found success and some of the challenges that they faced. And this actually aligns with our theory of change work and our social change objectives as a charity. And we've got multiple formats that we're going to be able to share this information through our safety magazine. We're currently hosting a monthly webinar series that is free to attend. We also have roundtables that we host for our existing supporters of our Being Well Together program. And then we also have sector interest groups. And of course, you're attending a conference today, and we also have our annual conference later in the year as well. So we've got multiple ways in order to share the experience of those that have attended the workshops. But also we'll be hosting a roundtable event for those, or some of those that attended the workshops later in this year. And then also we've, as I mentioned earlier when I spoke about who's attended these workshops, we are doing some more detailed analysis on what are the needs of those that have attended the workshops and what can we do as an organization to support those needs in the future. But also, when I started reviewing the reasons for investing in workplace wellbeing as reported by those that attended, I put it all into a document and found that there was 5,000 words of reasons that these individuals were attending these workshops and the reasons for why then as an organization we're investing in workplace wellbeing. And in that initial analysis, I've noticed there is a gap in awareness of how to document the reasons for investing in workplace wellbeing. And I think that might also contribute to one of the reasons why individuals are struggling to influence the purse string holders and create a business case. And so, of course, that's what's led to this being a presentation topic for today's conference. And so now we'll move into the second part of the presentation today, which is ultimately how to create a business case for workplace wellbeing. And I'll start that with similar to something that Jonathan did within his presentation, starting with the definition of wellbeing. So we within British Safety Council have our own definition of wellbeing, which is that it's an individual's ongoing state which enables them to thrive. So where it's an ongoing state which enables a person to thrive, that means that it's a fluctuating status. It's not something that somebody achieves and then suddenly has forever. It's something that will fluctuate depending on a whole host of factors. And so ultimately anything that happens within a person's life, whether it's in work or outside of work, will ultimately have an impact on their well-being and therefore have an impact on their ability to thrive. Now, of course, when you're putting together a business case for well-being, if you use just this definition in isolation, it might be difficult to put together metrics for how you'll document success, or put together interventions that you could use to enhance an individual's ability to thrive. So rather than just relying on our definition of well-being, we also refer to the domains of well-being which have been previously documented by the CIPD. And of course, if you've seen these domains before, or if you've attended any presentation we've delivered before, this will be familiar to you. If you are one of our Being Well Together supporters, again, this is something that will be familiar to you. And for those of you that this is new to, what this shows is the 7 different domains of well-being, all of which have an impact on somebody's well-being within the workplace. And it really helps to expand out the different areas that any organization could actually focus their well-being program or their business case for well-being or their well-being strategy in order to target the needs of the organization. And quite often when I ask the question in a kind of workshop setting, what does well-being mean to you? People will often talk about it's a sense of how you feel, or it's a representation of happiness, or it's my physical health. And usually what you'll find is that people's definition of well-being will usually sit within the health domain in the top left, and maybe in the good lifestyle choices along the bottom of the screen there, which of course is absolutely right. But when you have a look at the good work section, you can see that actually working environment is something that will have an impact on somebody's subjective and objective well-being. So if we are putting together interventions that we think are of need of our organization, let's say like resilience training, but the working environment itself is the cause of the problem for stress within the workplace, then all we're really doing there is papering over the cracks. We're not actually addressing the source of the issue of stress. So that's taking good work as an example. If we come across to values and principles, you can see that leadership is another factor that has an impact on workplace well-being. So again, if you have a series of interventions that have been designed to improve well-being in the workplace, but actually there are issues with leadership within the organization, where maybe the managers or the leaders haven't received guidance on how to best look after their team members, or how to signpost their team members as to where to access well-being provisions. It may be that leadership is actually the source of the problems within the organization that is mostly having an impact on the well-being of the workers. Coming down to collective and social, again, you've got employee voice that features here as one of the domains. I mentioned earlier within our findings from the workshops that employee voice, or understanding the needs of the employees, was put right at the very bottom of what organizations think would help them to overcome their challenges. And so actually employee voice could be one of the key sources of information that is needed to be able to generate a business case for well-being. And then coming along to these other domains, you've got personal growth, so career development, lifestyle choices, of course, healthy eating, physical activity, and then one of the domains that has been particularly prominent in the last 12 months at least is financial well-being. So looking at fair pay, benefits, policies, retirement planning, and financial support available. So any one of these factors are things that could have an impact on an individual's well-being within the workplace. So all of these really need to be considered when we're thinking of how to generate a business case for workplace well-being. And in my kind of review for putting together, or in my preparation for putting together these slides, I was reading the book Organised Wellbeing by Tim Marsh and Louise Ward. And this image on the right-hand side kind of jumped out at me as being something that I found funny, but also something that I can relate to. You know, where the powers that be ask the question, what has wellbeing ever done for us? And they say, okay, you know, fewer of our best staff are leaving, a reduction in absenteeism and presenteeism, more creativity, discretionary effort, productivity, and a better reputation, granted. But apart from that, what else? And so I think it's quite interesting that many of us are in positions where we actually have to put together a justification as to why an organization should be investing in workplace well-being. But really, a business case is a great opportunity to do one of two things. One, it helps organizations to understand what are the options available, what would be the cost in terms of time, money, and then also what are the opportunities that we're either losing out to or gaining from by investing in workplace well-being that is targeted to the need of the organization. And two, it shows the decision makers that there is a good level of rigor behind the action that's recommended. It's not just another intervention that's been selected because there was a press release saying that this is the next big thing for us to do as an organization. So before putting together any form of business case, this is something that we shared in our roundtable with our Being Well Together supporters in February as being the absolute bare minimum prerequisites that should be documented and fully understood by the person that is putting together the business case in the first place. So if you're looking at this today with a keen interest in how to generate a business case for workplace wellbeing, I would highly encourage you to either take a print screen of this or to take some notes, that if you're unable to document each of these key areas, then you're not ready to start documenting the business case for workplace wellbeing. But as soon as you do have a clear indication of these key areas, then you'll be well set up for starting the process of writing a business case for wellbeing. You need to have a good understanding of where have you been as an organization in the past. What have you tried? What's worked? What hasn't worked? And what has the feedback been from the employees? You then need to understand what is the status quo? Where are you today? What's happening right now? And of course, you need to have a clear vision as to where you want to be with your wellbeing strategy and wellbeing programs in the future. If you don't have that vision and understanding of where you want to be in the future, then you won't be able to define your mission, and you won't be able to define the possible obstacles and what the long-term goals are. And it'll be very difficult for you to secure any kind of funding without having these key bits of information. It's not just a gut feeling that's going to get you that funding for the business case. And then beyond those prerequisites, what I've detailed here is a sample business case canvas, which is free to access. These are, there's multiple tools that you can access that will give you an ability to document your business case. This one in particular is from myro.com, bottom right there for the spelling of this website. But there are multiple other sources of information as to how you can put together a business case. So yeah, what you have here is a canvas which is free to access from myro.com. Really useful tool for you to be able to put together and document the baseline requirements for putting together a business case for wellbeing. And in particular, this template shows you the order of which you need to start documenting this information, and then what questions you need to be able to answer in order to be able to justify to the stakeholders and the decision makers within the organization. I'm not expecting you to be able to actually read any of the information within this slide. I'm just putting it together as an example template of how you could put together and illustrate a business case for wellbeing. And what we're actually going to do in the next few slides is pick out some of these key areas, like the problems, like the stakeholders, like the risks involved. And so I can start to give you a flavor as to what type of information you need to consider when putting together a business case in order to increase the chances of not only the success of the business case, but also the chances of you getting funding from the decision makers. Starting off with, what is the problem? From many of the organizations that we've worked with in the past, whenever we ask them, what is your overarching mission statement? What is it that you're trying to achieve with your wellbeing program? Many of them actually are unable to answer that very clearly. Many will say because it's the right thing to do, or because I'm passionate about wellbeing and I want to help individuals. But actually, you know, one of the important things before being able to create this business case is to understand what is the starting point. If you have within an organization issues with specifically suicide in the workplace, then that absolutely needs to be the starting point, and needs to be the core issue that needs to be addressed. Whereas if an organization doesn't have issues with suicide within the workplace, or doesn't have issues with accidental death in the workplace, doesn't have issues with fatal injuries or serious injuries or accidents within the workplace, then they can start to advance their starting point to be more in line with the preventative model of workplace wellbeing. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that if you are focusing on prevention of fatal injuries in the workplace, you can't also look at some of the more proactive and preventative approaches to workplace wellbeing. It just means that you need to identify what is the starting point, so you can then also identify what is the future with your wellbeing mission statement. So you need to really clearly identify what is the problem that you're trying to address. Now, the problem that you're trying to address might depend on who are the decision makers within the organization. So you'll often see things like presenteeism and absenteeism reported as reasons to invest in workplace wellbeing. And of course, you might then be referring to the financial director or the human resources department in order to secure the business case for funding for workplace wellbeing. However, there might be other reasons for investing in workplace wellbeing, and there might be other KPIs within the organization that could help you get that funding for the business case. So within that process, once you've understood what your starting point is, and once you've understood what your suggested solutions might be and what are the areas you're trying to target, you really need to identify who are the decision makers and who are the main points of influence within an organization. Now, what was quite nicely articulated within Jonathan's session this morning was that it could be that all of these areas within the organization have a level of responsibility for workplace wellbeing. But if you can identify within your own organization who has the biggest level of influence, you can then start to map out what are their key priorities, what are their key performance indicators, what are they motivated by. And what I've done here on the screen is just shared some possible examples of outcomes that each department might be interested in, and therefore might be useful to include in the business case when you're putting it together. So if we take human resources as an example, they might be interested in better employee morale and engagement. That might be something that, if it was put into a business case to secure funding, that might be something that ticks a box for them. Whereas if you look at health and safety, it may be that the director wants to ensure safe places to work, and therefore having data that shows investing in this particular workplace wellbeing strategy will result in a safer place to work is something that will prick their ears up. It might be, of course, finance. They might be looking for return on investment. And of course, then, looking at specific interventions that have resulted in X amount of return on investment are more likely to secure the buy-in from those that are responsible within finance. Or coming across to operations, it might be that they are most interested in better customer service. That might be the number one thing that would secure you funding within your business case. Or if it's within the executive team, it could be enhancing the employer brand. Now, I've put all of these in as examples for each of these departments, but not through coincidence and not plucking them out of thin air. All of these examples on the screen that may be areas of motivation for each of these departments have all been found to be more successful in organizations that have a standalone wellbeing strategy in place. And so all of these things are areas that you could find data that supports whatever your case is within your organization, and of course relevant to your specific need. So another question we often get asked is, how can you determine what success looks like within your wellbeing strategy? And what could I put into my business case that will ultimately secure me that funding? Well, here on the screen are some of the examples that you could use for evaluating the success. And there are many more than this. These are just some high-level examples and areas that we could explore. some of which might just be looking at the participation rates in the wellbeing provisions that you're currently providing. It could be, if you put together a training session on something like menopause or neurodiversity, how many of the organisation actually attended that training session? And what was their feedback? What did they think? Did it align to what your overarching mission statement was? Is it helping you to achieve those objectives that you've set within your business case? You could then look at absence data. So how many of the employees are taking leave away from work due to ill health? And what are the reasons? Is there any themes within those reasons? Is the vast majority of the reason for absence due to musculoskeletal issues or issues with mental health? I mean, the vast majority of data would suggest that that is more than likely going to be the case. But you might find that within your specific organization that you have access to this data that could be used as a metric for evaluating success of your wellbeing provision. You might then look at, say, something like the employee assistance program usage. So why are employees making use of the employee assistance program if you have one in place? And what are the outcomes of the support being provided by the employee assistance program? Of course, all of this information would naturally be anonymous, so it wouldn't be identified to any individuals within the organization. But all of these are potential metrics that you could use to put into a business case as a way to evaluate success. And being even more specific than that, what I'm sharing here is just a list of 25 different metrics of measuring well-being. And I most certainly would not recommend that you go away and start to use all of these metrics within your organization, or you put this into your business case as these are examples of metrics that we could use. I would always encourage you to identify, first of all, what your mission statement is and what you're trying to achieve, and then only use metrics that will actually help you to determine whether or not you're being successful with your mission statement and what your objectives of your business case are. And what I'm showing here on screen is, as I said, just an example or a list of ways in which you can measure well-being within an organization, and what the area measured is, what the name of it is, and then the number of questions that exist. And I've taken that from the book by Hesketh and Cooper that was published in 2019. But a key point here to highlight is what I'm not hoping for you to take away from this slide is examples that you should now put into your business case. Is just showing you that there are multiple ways for you to be able to measure the success of a well-being intervention or a well-being service or a well-being strategy. But it ultimately needs to be relevant to whatever the needs are as identified from the work that you'll do with your employees. And so bringing us now to the close for my presentation, what I would like for you to take away as key messages from today is that if you are going to put together a business case for well-being, first of all, you need to have clearly defined what your prerequisites are. So understanding what the history is, understanding what the status quo is, understanding what the future of your well-being plans are. You need to have a clear understanding as to who the decision makers are within your organization and what are the factors that they are motivated by. What are the KPIs that you could put into your business case in order to increase the chances of you securing funding and to invest in the well-being of your workforce. And then, of course, being able to clearly illustrate and document your business case and present it in a way that is easy to digest and told as a story and matches the needs of the organization is further going to increase your chances for success. And a really key point here is that any form of well-being strategy or business case and documenting it is just the beginning. Having clear project plans after you've put together the business case and the well-being strategy are vital to succeed in the future. And similar to Audrey's session, I'll finish my session with a quote from Warren Buffett, that someone's sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. So the work that it takes and the time that it takes to put together these business cases and these well-being strategies right now will certainly benefit the employees of the future. So thank you very much, and welcome Stephen back if there are any questions.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you ever so much. Really, really insightful. It's great to get a real clear sense of what in particular small micro businesses are seeing in terms of their approach. There were a lot of questions that came through, a couple that I'm going to pick up on in the interest of time. Again, others will be shared post. First was around, and I apologize, I did jump in a little bit earlier on this one actually, which came in right at the beginning, was what are some of the key considerations to ensuring an approach reaches our unconnected or hard to reach workforces? Are there any key observations that you found, Marcus?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because every organization will have different communication pathways that are used within an organization. So we recently hosted a roundtable, and this came up as one of the conversation points. We spoke about one organization that had multiple different formats of communicating. So they had an intranet page, they had a Microsoft Teams group, they had a WhatsApp group, they had a regular newsletter that went out to employees, and they had all these different ways of communicating with their workers. But what they were finding is that many workers were saying that they didn't know the latest information, or they didn't know how to access these services or these provisions. And then when they actually went out and spent some time understanding the needs of the employees and what their preferred communication channels are, they then actually reduced everything down to just simply having a company WhatsApp group. And so any form of communication would be done via a company WhatsApp group, because that was identified as the preferred method of contact, mainly because the majority of their workforce were engineers on the move. And so they weren't sitting at a desk and being able to check the internet page or checking their emails. Whereas being on the move, they would have access to a smartphone, and using WhatsApp as a format of communication was the easiest way for them to be reached. And then since then, they've found that their levels of engagement have increased, just because they've made their communication channels more simple.
Thanks, Marcus. One last question before we break for lunch. Are there differences in the legal responsibility relating to work-related stress from country to country, or are they all the same globally?
So the quick answer to that is no, they're not all the same globally. However, the UK is probably a leader in the legislation for addressing stress and mental health within the workplace. So within the UK, it is a legal requirement to assess what factors might cause stress within a workplace, and crucially to be able to put together action plans to address what might cause stress within the workplace. And by doing that, of course, any organisation is going to be able to put together interventions or changes within a working environment in order to reduce the occurrence of stress within the workplace. And so I would say the UK is probably a leading force on that. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not the same across the globe in terms of legislation. That's definitely an area that we need to see more growth in.
Thank you ever so much.